Welcome to I'll Take Wednesdays, the conversational portion of UNC'S Corner. If you don't know, we're going to talk about the DJ Crew Cole mixtape also. If you don't know what this is the conversational piece of UNC'S Corner. I am your host, UNC, aka Tato, whichever one you prefer. And yeah, this is I'll Take Wednesday. Before anything else, I just want to say for this rendition of I'll Take Wednesday, the panel will be open so people can leave their comments or their can floor their opinions in as far as what we're going to talk about. I want us to talk about the Speedsta show, right, first, and people's reaction to the Speedsta show. And I feel like what I deem as incompetent behavior from the climate, childish behavior more so than anything from the climate. And what I think is happening in SA hip hop right now, and as far as commentary, is just like some weird situation. So for those who don't know, Speedsta has a new show called Up to Speed, right, where it's him and man, I forgot the lady's name. I think it's Fifla or something along those lines. My apologies, no disrespect. And OK Swisher, of course. And this is essentially Speedsta's show where they discuss hip hop, right? It's a 3-person format, and they come on and they discuss like their opinions on the game and so on and so forth. When I watched the show, I immediately felt like this is something that will belong on a Vuzu. This is something that will belong on an SABC channel. This is something that will belong on an MTV. This is something that will belong on DSTV, right? This is a TV format show, right? Number one, but also number two, and most importantly, when I was watching it, I felt like it's also a industry show, right? I don't think it's a cultural show. And I think it's an industry show. I think the format is industry, of course. I think the opinion is industry, of course. I think the point of departure is industry, and I think it's just an industry show in a climate, right, or in an environment or in a landscape where not a lot of hip hop commentary is happening on an industry level. Right, on a high budget industry level. I feel like the show Up to Speed is necessary personally, right? Are the takes truthful or relevant, for lack of a better term? I don't think so. I think the landscape of hip hop right now is so far removed from the industry because the industry is not prioritizing it. However, having an industry voice in as far as hip hop right now in the hip hop landscape, I think it's important. And I think what Speedsta and the lady, again, for those who know the lady's name or remember the lady's name, please say it on the comment section, so I don't have to say the lady. By no means of disrespect, with all due respect, I forgot the lady's name. But basically, Speedsta, the lady, and Swisher, I think their contribution, right, in as far as that show is basically for industry taste makers, or at the very least, it's informed by what the industry is looking for in as far as SA hip hop. Right, a lot of opinions were made. Obviously, what's happening right now in the SA hip hop lexicon, more specifically Twitter, right, is how people are arguing the whole Swisher opinion about Blackie didn't do much in 2024. People are fighting the fact that Speedsta didn't know De La Soul dropped. People are fighting, and the biggest talking point is people are fighting the fact that I think Speedsta said something along the lines, if I remember correctly, that Kill Brady or Brady doesn't make music that transcends outside of him and his brooms, which is something very similar to what I said last year about the whole underground. Right, I didn't include Brady in this conversation, but it is an opinion that I've had for the better part of a year plus, right? Where I was like, these people are creating music for themselves and not the greater South Africa, right? And essentially, Twitter went crazy, and the so-called commentators on Twitter are talking crazy about Speedsta, and they're calling him all kinds of names, right? So that's basically what's happening currently. My opinion on this is that, again, I think the industry needs such a show. Or rather, I think hip hop, the culture, needs such a show because it can teach people who are stuck in cultural conversations about the industry. I think there's not enough industry talk. I think on this platform specifically, Verseless and myself have made it very clear that playing a cultural game is far different than playing an industry game. And I think the three people on that show give an industry perspective. We all know that, in as far as hip hop commentators, Swisher is probably the most industry ready version of all of us, right? Because that's essentially what he's doing. That's how he packages his content and so on and so forth. We do know that the lady and Speedsta work within the industry. And yeah, I think the show and their opinions make sense for the value of the show, of which the value of the show is industry knowledge. You understand? Commerce, teaching artists how to make money, teaching artists how to pick trends that allow the industry to pick them up, teaching artists and speaking, about things that can move the needle industry wise. I feel like their opinions may be disingenuous from a cultural perspective, right? Which is fair because I don't think they're there to have a cultural conversation. One of the things that Speedsta said, right? One of the things that Speedsta said is that the mixes that Lesedi and Slick are doing are not carrying SA hip hop forward or something along those lines, right? And they just playing songs that are for the underground and a specific group or specific sect within SA hip hop. And I do agree, right? I remember speaking to Shishiliza last year, and I was like, if possible, what I would love to do this year is essentially incorporate the boom bap version of that. So what Speedsta and Lesedi are doing, right? I would love to be the person that incorporates the boom bap version of that, or at the very least facilitate the boom bap version of that. Number one, but also number two, I remember speaking to Shishiliza and saying to Shishiliza, Fifla, yes, I think it's Fifla, yes, thank you very much. I remember saying to Shishiliza also that there needs to be an industry level, right? There needs to be an industry level of this, what Lesedi and Slick are doing, right? Where industry ready, industry packaged songs that are gonna take SA hip hop back to the market, right? There should be a platform where these songs are played, right? And yeah, like I think the biggest misconception in SA hip hop, and this is what I want to talk about in as far as specifically hip hop Twitter. And I know I was involved in a tift where it was implied that my content divides TikTok hip hop and Twitter hip hop. And I think my content doesn't divide anybody. I think my content explains certain things that Twitter doesn't give the necessary facility to do, right? Or Twitter doesn't facilitate certain conversations. I feel like the conversation around Twitter right now is that show sucks, or if at the very least that show is disingenuous, but they're not even saying why the show is disingenuous to them. I think they're not even explaining why the show is disingenuous. I think what they're doing is that they are essentially shooting the man, for lack of a better word, right? Or speaking down on the man, which is Speedsta, and they're like, okay, what did Speedsta do? What has Speedsta done? Blah 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 blah. And I think they are becoming disingenuous, in fact, by saying that, because Speedsta is on a nationally syndicated radio station, right? And essentially he has the only nationally syndicated hip hop show, right? Now, we may not agree with Speedsta's methods and how he gets his message across or does things, but what is very important to note is that Speedsta is still holding hip hop down, right? Hip hop doesn't exist on the internet. Hip hop shouldn't exist on the internet, right? If hip hop is to grow and spread its wings again. It's also very important to note that SA hip hop is no longer what it was in 2016. Right? I think it's cool to those who want to be cool, and it's sustainable to those who want to be sustainable. So you can have a world where Brady is popular, and a world where Speedsta's opinions are also valid. Right? I feel like the people who are not facilitating this conversation are the people on Twitter. Right? More specifically, the people that I was fighting with last week. Right? And I feel like it's so sad that people want to fight, right, for their voice to be recognized, but you are not using your voice for the right reasons, right? I feel like personally the conversation that needs to be had is not what has Speedsta done. I think is to understand the perspective that Speedsta comes from, understand that hip hop is no longer a cool person's genre. It is a legacy genre like every other genre in this country outside of Mapiano and the underground. And even then, the underground is a derivative of SA hip hop. So I feel like people should stop trying to play cool politics with SA hip hop and actually get to a point where it's like this thing as a genre, as an ecosystem, as a culture is sustainable. There is a cool factor to it, which is your Brady's, which is your Mfana Touchlines, which is your Brother Cooper's, which is all that. But there's also a sustainable side to it, which is your Questas, which is your KOs, your Casper, your Vest, your Speedsters, and so on and so forth. I feel like the two worlds can exist, right, can coexist, but I think the conversation that is being had around SA hip-hop, more specifically by the people on Twitter, does not even open or facilitate that type of conversation, because I feel like the people that are having the conversations themselves are either, which is ironic, because I saw they were saying people are arrested, are stuck in arrested development. I think the people who are saying that are stuck in arrested development themselves, because if you're still trying to play cool politics within SA hip hop while you've been doing journalism or commentary within SA hip hop for the past 5 years, it means that you're not moving forward. It means that you are still trying to play cool politics within a culture, genre, and ecosystem that has transcended past being cool, right? I feel like SA hip hop as a genre, as an economy, as an ecosystem, right, does not need to be cool at all times. And I feel like commentators and journalists alike, right, need to understand that these two things, which is cool culture and sustainable business and economics, right, can coexist, right? I feel like we need to change the conversation when it comes to SA hip hop, right? And it is ironic that the people who are supposed to have this conversation, who are outside and who are within the industry and who are friends with industry people, are not having the industry conversation. I even find it more particularly odd that the people who are outside and who are in the industry and have friends in the industry do not understand that Speedsta's point of departure and the point of departure of the show is more so industry than it is cultural. They can't speak industry. Therefore, it gives me the impression that you think you are in the industry, but you are not. You are just a puppet that is running around the offices and you are glorified with a title. However, you're not doing the necessary work nor have the necessary capacity to understand what the industry needs from this culture of ours, right? And with that being said, I personally think and I personally believe that in as much as culturally some of the points that Speedsta was making may be disingenuous, in as much as culturally the points that Speedsta was making and the whole show was making may be far removed, culturally speaking, in as much as what they were saying about Blackie is unfair, because Blackie has been culturally sound in as far as his contribution and his positioning in as far as the whole of 2025. Under industry metrics, they are correct. One of the anecdotes that they used is when they were talking about Blackie more specifically, right? Speedsta said, I feel like in the year of 2025, Blackie hasn't done shit, right? And it sounds harsh and it sounds very dismissive. However, if you understand and listen to the conversation to understand, the metric of comparison that was used was 2024 for Blackie. And if you look at the commercial and industry penetration that Blackie had over the year of 2024 as compared to the year of 2025, the two do not match up. That's why the opinion comes through to the opinion of Blackie hasn't done shit in 2025 comes through, because the metric that is being used is the same person, the same person's impact from a commercial and industry level, right, in the previous year. However, I feel like there's such a disingenuous, right, understanding, or at the very least, there's such a narrative building that is being done on Twitter, right, by said commentators, right, to make specific people look crazy. Somebody said, matter of fact, P that G said, and I want to give P that G a big shout out. P that G said, it is all good and well to make people like Speedsta look like fools, but the moment we start speaking about Stogie T, we are blasphemous. And that's what I was trying to explain, and this is what I've been saying across my content. And as far as the clickiness, and as far as the narratives that are being built, and as far as the lobbying that is being done, right, for specific personalities and specific rappers, right, and as far as rhetoric, and as far as conversation, right, it doesn't speak to what's happening, right, within the culture and outside within the industry. Because the culture, right, inside of it, the politics are different to the politics of the outer industry, right? And I feel like these things are not being accounted for when people are writing articles, when people are putting out tweets, when people are sitting on spaces, when people are walking around with their glorified titles, right? When people are outside and skinnering essentially about what SA hip hop is. I feel like these conversations are not being had. I feel like there's almost a inability, right, for SA hip hop to have layered conversations like adults. Which makes me ask, where are the OGs in these spaces? Where are the OGs in these spaces? Where are the people that play both sides? People that come with industry understanding and cultural understanding. Where are these people? Right? People want to walk around with glorified titles of OGs and they've put in this many years and so on and so forth. Where are these people? Because here's the thing that's happening. And again, Tuto's not here, but Tuto's one of the most important figures in as far as what's happening, because he tweets nonsense, right? He's one of the people that tweets nonsense, even though, right, he has myself and Verseless, and he does this on purpose. As he said, I'm an agent of chaos out there. But what needs to be understood is that Tuto is a representative of what the greater youth feels in as far as what's happening with the industry and what's happening culturally. And if the conversation is not being fixed and people like Tuto and the rest of the generation are being set down and explained that, hey, yes, culturally he may be wrong. Yes, culturally he may be disingenuous. However, in order for the culture to have enough commerce for it to exist, they need to abide to these rules that are of the industry. If there's no one that tells Tuto this, and there's no one that explains to Tuto this, right? And now it is very important to note we're using Tuto as an example, or rather a figure that represents the greater youth or the greater mindset of the youth. If there's no one that teaches Tuto this and no one that tells Tuto these things, for Tuto to either go back and explain to everybody else, or at the very least Tuto to have the knowledge so he can create an impact, then where are the OGs? Where are the so-called writers? Where are the so-called legacy writers that worked for Hype and worked for this and worked for that? Where are these people? What is your job? Is your job popularity contests, or is your job to service the culture? What is your job? Because the conversation on Twitter is very disingenuous. The conversation on Twitter, right, does not explain that Speedsta and Speedsta's show, it is definitely not for the culture. It is for the industry. Its purpose is to give perspective from the industry so the culture can have commerce, can have money in order for it to exist. At the end of the day, it's good making music for people who think you are cool. It's a different thing making music for people who are going to buy your CDs and go or buy the albums on iTunes or go to your concert. Those two things are different. So if you're going to walk around and say you're an OG, or if you're going to walk around and say you're a lauded writer or lauded commentator, or you have friends in the industry and you are close to the pulse of the industry, do the job that you are so fighting for. Do the job. Do the job. We have spoken about this multiple times. There's a generation of kids that we have taught. And when I talk about me and Verseless and the rest of the corner, when I say We have taught the generation about the difference between culture and industry. And these things at some point in time and intersectionality needs to come into play in order for people to eat. It is one thing wanting to play cultural politics, and then when a rapper dies broke, you're going to say the industry didn't help them when you didn't give them the proper information. When you are calling Speedsta show, or you are bad-mouthing Speedsta on Twitter because he said Kill Brady's music does not transcend, which is something that I've been saying. Then the rapper dies broke, then you're like, the industry failed them. No, you failed them. Because if you have the industry connect, you need to tell that rapper how to make it in the industry, not how to make it being cool amongst you guys on Twitter. It is very important to note, we need to get rid of the people who are building narratives that are not going to help the talent within this genre of ours, within this culture of ours. This thing does not function from cool credits. It functions from rands and dollars and nairas. And yes, commercialism sometimes hurts the culture, but at the very bottom of the culture, there's always creativity. And for that creativity to flourish, we always need somebody to go, oh, I would love to be commercially viable. The politics, I feel like, and Big Verse, I see your thing, I see your request, I'll accept it now. I feel like also what people fail to understand is that the politics that we have within culture, I will use Mfana Touchline as an example because Fifla spoke about it, right? The politics that we have within the culture, is it hip hop, is it not? Is it a good brand of hip hop, is it not? These are cultural conversations. These are cultural politics, right? These are conversations that will set the standard and the barometer for what's yet to come in as far as art, right? Once that art is commercially accepted, it is beyond us. Now the industry needs to talk. And Fifla mentioned Mfana Touchline, that Mfana Touchline's impact, right? Mfana Touchline's impact is the dopest impact of 2025 because he went to go borrow stylistically what we, our generation, right, used to rock in as far as clothing. The Ed Hardys, the Rick Owens, all of that, the True Religion jeans and so on and so forth. And then he went to Kwaito and borrowed the Sonics there, went to hip hop, borrowed the swag and created his genre, whatever the genre is, Sifela, whatever, right? Now, commercially, that music makes money. And if we culturally accept him as part of SA hip-hop, then it's a win for SA hip-hop commercially. But we need to make, essentially, the decision through these conversations and these politics that we are having. If we are saying Mfana Touchline is not hip-hop, he's something else, then it's a commercial win for whatever that is. Then we set the standard for what's commercially viable for us. But the conversation is inherently different because when I speak right here, I speak from the bottom. When Music Review Friday happens and we give people essentially advice on how to fix songs, we're fixing songs that are aligning to the culture. And then once we get it, we align it to the industry. You take people like Timbo, right? Who ended up having a song with Kane Keed, I believe, right? Timbo went from being culturally good to being commercially good. Now, being commercially, you take a person like Logan. Logan went from being culturally good to being commercially good. There's a bunch of artists who go from the culturally good and culturally acceptable pipeline to the commercially acceptable pipeline. These are two different things and these need two different understandings. Oh, you can rap real good, but you make a great song. Therefore, this song will take off. So the Speedsta podcast is the part that makes your song sell. Everything else is the part that makes your song good. These two things must work in tandem, and there must be an understanding in as far as narrative building. We cannot bash what the industry says. And this is what piano essentially is this is where piano differs, and this is what Bash always talks about, right? Or Shishiliza always talks about, right? He always talks about the fact that, hey, right, in piano we have figured out how to have commercialism and culture sit in one. And yes, there may be some strays that come in, like John Vulgate, who will come in and take off, and we will look at it and go, that's a little bit shifty. We will have like strays like Shuka that will come in, which is an AI situation, and then it takes off. Yeah, sure. However, culturally, we know how to go essentially commoditize this. Hence, New Money Gang, Piano Hub, so on and so forth. In hip hop, what I do believe is the problem, the virus, the disease is the commentators, right? More specifically, Twitter commentators, dare I even say. I'll fight with you guys again. I don't care, right? Because the cultural responsibility is on y'all, because you guys garner the most numbers. And if you're going to garner the most numbers, then have the cultural responsibility to do the right thing, because your numbers then are just useless, and the respect that you get online does not translate to the respect that the culture requires in order for it to move forward. Where are the OGs? And if there are no OGs, open the space for people who have the understanding to give clarity, like Speedsta. That is my take.